nerds, what's up? Look at me, it's only January and I've already read one of the books I promised you all I would read this year because it has been on my TBR for literally years, and that is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. This is a very famous fantasy book that I feel like everybody has read or everyone is always telling you to read, and I've just kind of kept putting it off. You guys will know I explained that in the video of the books that I felt like I needed to read. And you know what? It lived up to a lot of the hype. I really enjoyed it and I gave it a solid 4 stars. It didn't quite have that extra something to push it towards 5 to me, but a completely very solid read. This beginning part of my review is going to be a non-spoiler review, so I will say that the beginning started pretty slow for me. I would say that I was much more invested in Locke's past than I was in his present, and it was about page 300, 350 that things started to get really interesting for me. Now, that sounds crazy, but like in a fantasy book, something taking to page 300 to get interesting, I feel like is often standard. Like, I don't know, it didn't bother me very much, but that was the point in the book where I was getting a lot more invested. And that middle portion I think was probably the strongest part of the novel. Like, I really enjoyed how the past was being weaved with the present and how we were finding out new information and how it related directly to what was happening in the present of our story. And I just thought it was really well done and really gripping and some really good character work. There's also a clear turning point in this novel. If you've read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. And I thought that was also really well done. I was not expecting that turning point, and it really gave this momentum and energy to the novel and also changed it, because I will say, like, my expectations going in is that I always heard this is a heist book. This is a heist story. So when I hear that, I think very Ocean's 11, like a team together pulling off an elaborate heist, an elaborate plan. I don't want to reuse that word. And I would say, like, yes, I understand why that's used to describe this book, but I don't actually think it is really a typical heist story. And if you're going into it just for that very specific feeling, that is not what you'll get from this. And that was a surprise to me, but it wasn't an unwelcome surprise. It was like, oh, that's probably why this book has stood a lot of the test of time, because it has some of those heist elements, but really kind of twists them and changes up what you think you know about those types of stories. And so for that reason, I felt that that was successful. So after all of that, I will say there was just parts at the ending that felt a little tedious to me, that dragged on a little long. So again, like, the very beginning was weak, parts of the ending were weak. The ending itself was not. Like, it was a very satisfying ending. I enjoyed the ending. There were just parts of getting to the ending that were a bit tedious. But overall, like I said, a super strong read, and not only a strong read, but a read I understand why so many people recommend, because I think it has broad appeal. Like, this is a fantasy book I can imagine myself lending out a lot or offering to people, because I do think it hits a lot of different things that people like. And so because of that, I'm not surprised it's stuck around, because even though it wasn't like a complete 5-star for me, it's a completely solid, dependable read. Like, you just know a lot of people are going to enjoy it. So when I posted this on my Instagram, a lot of people actually said a couple things. I had several people say that they DNF'd it in the first like 100 or so pages. So I would say if that was you, maybe to just push through, because I do think it picks up a lot. And I also have a lot of people like me who've had this on their TBR for years, and I say, look, it's worth it. It might be your next favorite. I totally understand why people are obsessed with this, but it will in my opinion, it'll be unlikely that you will like heavily dislike it. I feel like it has a broad appeal. So that's for my non-spoiler review. I am going to move into spoilers now because there is stuff I want to talk about. So if you have not read it yet, I'm about to spoil some pretty big moments. So click off, come back later. So the first thing I obviously want to talk about is the turning point. The turning point where the twins and Bug are killed came out of complete nowhere for me. I was floored. I finished the chapter and I looked and I told my husband, I was like, you couldn't have paid me to predict that. I had such like heist in my head, and Ocean's 11 in particular, that I just expected everything to eventually go right. So this very permanent going wrong, I hate saying I love it when characters die, because I didn't. I was very sad, like very, very sad. But on the other hand, like when authors make that bold of a move, it really turns the story. Again, it makes it really unexpected. And it was funny because I think up until that point, I wouldn't have necessarily said I cared a ton about any of the characters, like if you had asked me. But then when they died, I felt sad, and I also was extremely upset that I thought Jean was gonna die. And when he didn't die, I was so relieved, and I was like, I guess I care a lot about Jean. I didn't realize how much I cared about Jean. Jean was, by the way, by far my favorite character, and it surprised me because that didn't happen. I don't know when it happened, to be honest. It happened sometime before the moment where everyone gets killed, because I was suddenly very nervous and upset that Jean was gonna get killed. So I also love that too, when it's sneaky. Like, I can't point to a single thing that made me so attached to Jean and Lamora, but it kind of grew on me, which I just think is very masterful. And I will say the relationship between Jean and Locke was the highlight of the novel as well. Their friendship worked really well on screen, and from what I've heard now that I finished the novel, apparently that's the focus of a lot of the sequels. And well, we'll talk about that later, but I can see why. Like, it's just a really great friendship, and you guys know I don't think there's enough like fantasy duos and fantasy friendships, and so this one for sure goes to the top. I think when I made my fantasy duo list, I should go back and look at those comments. I'm pretty sure like 1 million people put Locke and Jean, and I just forgot about it. But now that I'm saying it, I'm like, I think they did, and it would totally make my list. Completely, like even after just one novel. As I said in my non-spoiler review earlier, the back and forth of kind of like either Locke's history or the history of the city with what's happening in the present always was a good thing, but it really gained momentum in the end. I really loved it. And obviously my two very favorite ones of these, but my top favorite one is one that actually is more separated, because near the end, some of the past flashbacks, it was like a short 2-page flashback, and then immediately what was happening after had to deal with what they just talked about. One of my favorites was one that gave a lot more distance, which is you have that flashback much earlier in the novel of, I just have to wait till Jean gets here. I'm just waiting on Jean. And it's a great flashback and you love it. And then for it to mirror that end scene where Locke is sitting there and you know it's a lie, but he's saying, I just have to wait till Jean gets here. Like 10 out of 10, my absolute favorite part of the whole novel. Almost like that was a 5-star moment. I was almost like, should I rate this book higher just for that scene? Top fantasy scene. Like, I really felt the emotion of that so much. In fact, my only desire was that Jean actually did get to come and finish him off. That would have made it like even better, but it was already such a good scene. And that's only second to, let's see if I can actually find it, the interlude called A Minor Prophecy, where Father Chain says, someday you're gonna mess up so magnificently, so ambitionally, so overwhelmingly that the sky will light up and the moons will spin and the gods themselves will be with glee, and I just hope I'm still around to see it. Oh please, said Locke, it'll never happen. Just such a good ending. So like, I know I'm gonna talk about my quibbles with the ending, but that part of the ending was just so good. And when you know that Gina's lying about the boats, like all of that was excellent. It being the death mark or the death repayment. I'm forgetting the word. Anyway, all of that was 10 out of 10. It was amazing. That almost like encouraged me to bump up my rating for that. I just couldn't forget a couple things. So the thing at the ending that was tedious was the part of everything going wrong. Now, to be clear, I really liked that everything was going wrong. That was a very purposeful part of the novel and you needed it. It was just like one event too far for me. It reminded me a little bit, not nearly as bad to be clear, as when I read Blackout, that Hugo novel, and I forget who it's by. Oh, you know what? I moved it. I don't even know where it is on my shelf. Oh no, there it is. By Connie Willis. And I said my big complaint was like at some point it's like, okay, I get it. Everything's going wrong. And it starts like stressing me out with how tedious it is. That's just like, I got that feeling a little bit at the ending. It was like, there was not a single event that was bad to me that went wrong. It was like, I just needed one less. Like he got caught one less time, one less scene. I hope that makes sense. It was just like, it was a little bit too much. It made me lose momentum. That's the word. Like it made the ending lose a little momentum and then it picked back up once we got to all those great scenes I talked about. But like that just made it a little difficult for me. And like I said at the beginning, I can't explain why, just like a little slow. But overall, I think going forward, okay, I do think it's read mostly as a standalone. People said, oh, it's totally a standalone. And maybe it's not like as much of a standalone as I expected. I think like there's clearly momentum for the other book or the next book. However, I do understand like a lot of our main threads are tied up in here. Okay. Will I read the next one? I'm trying to decide because on the one hand, the idea of Jean and Locke having little friendship adventures is extremely appealing and I want to read it. On the other hand, if it's like, I don't hear a lot of people talk about the sequels. So I'm like, are they not as good? Are they slower than the first one? Are they worth reading? That's where you guys can come in the comments and give me a consensus. Like, are people just not talking about them for other reasons? Are people not talking about them because apparently it's not finished? I do know that. I do know that people are sad he hasn't written a novel in a while. Are the other ones much less standalone, so it's not as nice to read them since they're not finished? Now, knowing that I usually don't care if something's not finished, you tell me in the comments below if I should keep going. All in all, I'm really happy I read it, and I'm glad I read it at the beginning of the year. It was a really fun read to start out. Solid book, would recommend, and I would love to know your thoughts about Locke Lamora in the comments below. And as always, if you like these kind of videos, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants, or see reviews early before I post videos for them, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.